Good afternoon. My name is Adela Pineda Franco. I am the director of the Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, and I welcome you to this virtual space that is streaming our Teresa Lozano Long Conference in Latin American Studies, organized by Professor Lina del Castillo, graduate students Camila Ordorica and Rafael Nieto, and behind the scenes, Paloma Diaz, scholarly assistant director of scholarly programs, and Susana Sharp, communications coordinator. All of them are being working very hard for us to be here, and I thank them deeply. It is not easy to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon, Cristina Rivera Garza, multifaceted author of many novels, many collections of stories, many collections of poetry, and many nonfiction books. I could devote more than 10 minutes just enlisting the many prizes and recognitions that she has received worldwide, from Mexico's most prestigious literary awards to the MacArthur Genius Grant in 2020. I could tell you about her scholarly accomplishments and her trajectory as a writer, scholar, and educator at many universities around the world. In particular, her role as a distinguished professor and the director of creative writing at the University of Houston, where she founded the first PhD program in creative writing in Spanish in the United States. But I prefer to tell you briefly why I think Cristina Rivera Garza has become an indispensable writer of our time. In her many books, Cristina has provided us with a critical perspective on the task of writing in the 21st century. A stylist of the highest order, she has nonetheless pushed the lonely novelist outside of the ivory tower. Within the hyper-mediated cultural environment in which we live, Cristina's books invite us to restore a will to act beyond living speech in writing. The voices of her narrators allow us to think critically about language, about gender, about memory, about political repression, about insanity, about migration. I admire Cristina's relentless drive to write without fear on feminicide. In this regard, she has taught us to use archives in completely different ways. The recent book is a journey into public and personal archives to bring to life the voice of her sister, Liliana, victim of feminicide more than 30 years ago. The process of writing this book will only conclude, Cristina once declared in an interview, if it contributes to bring to justice the man responsible for Liliana's murder. Joining the contingent voice of Liliana and other restless disappeared women in the name of justice is, I believe, the most vital, urgent call of Cristina's writing in our digital age. I thank her deeply for accepting our invitation.
Here it is. Muchas gracias, Adela. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you everyone for this invitation. It's truly a great honor to participate of this Congress, of this conference about archives, about objects and the ways in which we read them, the ways in which they activate our lives too, our memories and our experiences. So, muchas gracias. Quiero decirles que estoy muy contenta de estar aquí. Siempre es un gusto trabajar con el Centro de Latin American Studies en la Universidad de Texas en Austin, y especialmente con Adela, a quien me une una conexión por allá bostoniana importante. So thank you again. I'm really deeply honored and very happy to be here. Let me see. I have prepared a presentation for you, and so I'm going to be sharing. Some images and I read. I just, first, I wanted to tell you that I've been working with archives for now a number of years. I'm a historian by training, and I began my my research, my life as a researcher, and actually my life as a novelist, pretty much investigating archives, reading them, finding them, trying to figure out their structures, what made them unique. And so what I wanted to share with you today is the making of the Liliana Rivera Garza archive and the way in which I got to these documents, and therefore I'm going to be sharing some personal information, more of the anecdotal type of information about that. I'm going to be talking about how the structure of this archive, how that it worked in connection with my own writing. And so I'll be sharing some perspectives, theoretical and practical, about these. And all along, I'll be posing some questions about precisely our work in terms of reminding us, posing again and again the question about accumulation, which is another way of posing, as Adela just said it, the question about justice. Truly important for me in this regard. So let me start right now by sharing my screen. Let me see. Okay, share. I should be sharing right now. True? Is it true? Yes, wonderful. So let me change this so I can see what I'm sharing. And so here we go. The Liliana Rivera Garza archive, the making of the affective archive, and the afterlife of femicide. Let me start with a date. 1990. On July 16, 1990, my younger sister, Liliana Rivera Garza, was victim of a femicide. She was a 20-year-old architecture student at the Metropolitan Autonomous University, Azcapotzalco, living for the first time away from the family home in Toluca and on her own in the sprawling metropolis that was and is Mexico City. The news, which was featured in La Prensa, a tabloid usually devoted to gruesome murders, natural disasters, and scandalous affairs of pop stars, emphasized the obscure nature of the homicide. She was, after all, well loved by her neighbors, who invariably described her as a nice girl who greeted the old and the young alike. And everything looked orderly in the small apartment she rented on Mimosas Street in the Azcapotzalco neighborhood close to campus. And yet, she was found dead on a rainy Monday morning, fully clothed and on her bed. What had happened there? What kind of insidious violence had taken her life? Shocked, her university peers promptly answered questions posed by the police squad, providing pictures and eventually leading them to the home of Liliana's ex-boyfriend, who had been spotted the night before as he illegally climbed the wall of the premises and trespassed into Liliana's quarters. It was not too long afterwards that a judge in Mexico City collected enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant against Ángel González Ramos, who flew away and remained at large, allegedly in the United States. It has taken me 30 years to write this paragraph. It is succinct and truthful. It contains dates, names, quotes, and urban information that can be cross-checked with public records. It renders the facts straightforwardly, avoiding emotional outbursts or tears. The stunned silence that surrounded Liliana's femicide, however, was everything but. Family members and friends alike faced the crime in traumatic numbness, taken aback by a violence no one saw coming. We were rendered speechless with disbelief and guilt, paralyzed by the narrative of the passionate crime, which explained away the violence against women by universally blaming the victim and exonerating the perpetrator. Why was she living on her own in Mexico City? Did she have enough supervision of her parents? What was she wearing? Did she have another boyfriend? Questions like these were uttered in low voice as the news spread like wildfire among friends and peers in Mexico City and in Toluca, the industrial conservative city where Liliana had met Angel 6 years before in a public high school. In 1990, few spoke of domestic violence, and the concept of femicide did not exist, much less the legal figure that since 2012 clearly identifies the violence committed against women for being women in the penal code. News about the so-called muertas de Juárez, which increased as the decade progressed, were equally dismissed as extraordinary instances affecting mostly, if not only, poor brown women working at the assembly plants that had sprung up on border towns. The research work by journalist Sergio González Rodriguez, collected in the Femicide Machine in English, and The Part of the Crimes, one of the most impacting chapters of Roberto Bolaño's masterful novel 2666, constituted early and powerful attempts at bringing the systematic and systemic killing of women to national consciousness. In Backyard, the film that Mexican director Carlos Carrera released in 2009, he linked women's suffering to economic injustice, the rampant corruption and impunity amid a context of generalized indifference, if not indolence. In the film and in reality, the crimes of women, many of them indigenous and migrant, mounted as the inept police system proved unable to identify a culprit, especially because the workings of the criminals and the police became indistinguishable. As Rita Segato argued in La Guerra contra las Mujeres, these were not sexual crimes, but corporative crimes made possible within the configuration of a second state in which the mafia and the state apparatus coalesced, becoming accomplices and allies. It is very complicated to tell the story of a femicide in the language of patriarchy, the system that triggers and justifies femicide in the first place. After all, the mandate of masculinity that underscores women's plight around the world rests on pedagogies of cruelty, sealed by unyielding pacts of silence. Lacking a dignified language, a language as clear-cut, as compassionate in its enunciation of everyday and lethal gendered violence, is perhaps the first great obstacle in any critical rendition and denunciation of such violence. Little by little, on the streets, marching together, their hands aloft, or on the halls of the law, where so many cases of murdered women were neglected or lost in plain sight, women organized together with growing determination, uttering the unspeakable, bringing the unspeakable to light. From femicide to sexual harassment, from sexual abuse to intimate partner terrorism, women's mobilizations contributed to the coinage of a new terminology, denaturalizing ingrained aggression and allowing us to experience the world and ourselves anew. A range of feminisms with activists identifying themselves as members of the first or second or fourth wave have been right behind the social and cultural forces that generated a language able to identify, denounce, and prevent violence against women in our present and in the future. But 30 years later, would that language be enough to write the story of my sister's life? On April 2019, I accepted an invitation to participate in a series of dialogues organized by the Zapatista National Liberation Army. And so I ventured into Zapatista territory for the first time in my life. I wholeheartedly supported the ECLN when the indigenous armies rose up in arms, taking over key towns in the southern state of Chiapas as they opposed the signing of the Free Trade Agreement on New Year's Eve, 1996. I carefully read the correspondence that Subcommander Marcos established with activists and public figures in Mexico and abroad, invigorated by the resilience of these worlds where other worlds were possible. I was not surprised when they relinquished their bid for institutional power, concentrating instead in building a new way of life in accordance with the tradition and practices of the indigenous communities they represented. Human rights activists, linguists, students, writers, filmmakers alike converged in the semilleros that spring of 2019, where dialogues were direct to the point, excruciatingly critical, irrevocably uplifting. Organized around a rather lax agenda, dialogues involved topics as varied as the violation of human rights and contemporary indigenous cinema, young women activism, and the defense of indigenous languages. Subcomandante Galeano was there, and so was Marichui, the Nahua folk healer and human rights activist who contended for a place as a candidate in the 2018 presidential elections. There were more masked members of the ETLN on the scenario, all young men and women, and many more in the building, filled to the brim, listening attentively. The question about women's rights and feminism promptly emerged, and as Subcomandante Galeano and Guadalupe, a young Zapatista woman, articulated an answer, I sensed Liliana's presence nearing me. It was totally unexpected and overwhelmingly real. She is here, I said to my partner who sat by my right, enthralled by the talks. I had, up until then, kept a private, silent, and forcibly silenced mourning for my little sister. I had continued with my life, apparently unperturbed by this crime and its many reverberations. I had carved a place of its own in my heart and my psyche, beneath my skin, on the tip of my tongue. Nothing that I had ever written was not related to her untimely death. Nothing of what I became had not been touched by her brief presence on earth. Up until then, however, I had guarded her inside me, allowing no one to see how she grew within my body, robust and luminous as a generous tree of wild foliage. The language of patriarchy had made it difficult, almost impossible, to articulate Liliana's story from her point of view and in dignified ways. But that evening, as I turned around, looking intently for her face among the audience, trying to capture her laughter and stride, I caught myself thinking that this was Liliana's world, that she fitted right in, here, like a hand in glove. In a reverse anachronism, time had rearranged itself, and here it was finally Liliana's rightful world, born anew in 2019. I knew immediately and knew it for sure that her story and the story of thousands of women we have lost to gender violence could be told and could be heard there. I caught myself believing that it was simply true that the men and women surrounding me at that moment would listen attentively and amorously, in any case, emphatically, to her story. Such a thought, tempestuous and radiant, had not crossed my mind in 30 years. Exultant is a word that best described our mood as we headed back to town. We talked to everyone about everything as we boarded the last bus for San Cristobal. At dinner, I sat close to John Gibler, a Mexico-based US journalist who had written ever so carefully about the 43 students massacred at Ayotzinapa, which had taken place on September 26, 2014. And I had no qualms to tell him, however briefly, the story of my sister's femicide, asking him point blank and without apprehension for his help. I'm not so sure I could bear the images in the newspapers, I said, and he understood. 2020. There was no stopping afterwards. The scanned copies of the newspaper articles about my sister's femicide prompted me to the General Attorney's Office in Mexico City, where I filled out a series of forms as I requested a copy of her police case. Official answers were slow to come, so I went back to Mexico City and began the infinitely long journey into the labyrinthine halls of justice. As I conveyed in Liliana's Invisible Summer, I went from desk to desk trying to find out what had happened to my sister's documents until an employee of the Azcapotzalco Public Defender's Office, sensing my lack of familiarity with the protocols, was kind enough to grab me by my elbow and invited me to pause. Are you aware the files also die? She asked pointedly, holding my gaze. Do not think, not even for a minute, that police documents are immortal. Crimes prescribed, she explained nonchalantly, and all kinds of files are purged on routine basis. I scrutinized her face, unable to fully understand what she had just said, my mouth ajar, like a squeaky door in an empty barn. This is the end of the archive, I thought to myself after a couple of minutes, aghast. And was this, too, the end of memory? How could I write a story I had entombed within me, obliterating entire sequences and remembering or misremembering many others only haphazardly? Was the death of the archive the end of my sister's presence on earth for good? A historian by training, I was familiar with the inner workings of the depositories or collections containing historical records and documents, archivo muerto, as we say in Spanish, but had little contact with how official institutions keep and circulate their active files, archivo activo. I realized there and then, at the end of the hall of the Public Defender's Office, that I had lived under the illusion, that all documents, whether dead or alive, active or inactive, were to eventually find the rightful place, their grave, so to speak, in an archivo muerto. The very possibility that a document, especially a legal document related to an unresolved crime, could die, only to be disposed of afterward, purged away by a shredder machine or consumed by fire or neglect, thus sharing the destiny of so many forcibly disappeared bodies in Mexico, paralyzed me with terror. Was I to accept defeat, admitting that I lacked the materials required to exhume my sister's life? Or was I right there and then enraged enough to believe myself able to replace with something else the official file, the file twice dead? I walked away the Public Defender's Office hastily, a stern silence glued to my stride, scheming ways to retrieve or to produce Liliana's other archive, not the official one, probably lingering already in purgatory, deactivated and mute, unable to contribute to the reconstitution of her body and her words among us, but her personal depository, the remnants of hers, the proofs of her experience, documents still able to activate presence, flesh, affect. I knew where Liliana's belongings laid as much as I knew I had not been able to come even close to the cardboard boxes where we had hurriedly placed them. But now, 30 years later, and in the onset of a pandemic, I was scared enough to go back home and look into my sister's personal effects. I was soon to learn that Liliana had taken good care of her archive herself, a series of documents beyond the reach or even the interest of the state, generated on the grounds of pure affect. As a young girl who throve on friendship and complicity, she had written innumerable letters to cousins, friends, suitors, and other family members, including our father. and she had kept a good number of them. She exchanged countless mischievous messages, hastily written over pages ripped from school notebooks. And as a good archivist, she had safeguarded those as well. Every single postcard, every single scribble, every single drawing, she preserved them all. Rather than pressing the pieces of paper against each other, Liliana let them stand as they were, wrinkled or folded in complicated origami angles, floating on the confine of the box. Her blueprints, the papers she wrote, the class notes, her underlined books. She even kept, and in chronological order, the receipts of every single item she bought for her architectural projects at Lumen, the chain office and art supplies store in Mexico City. Her vision was voracious, and her selection of materials crossed the boundaries between the transcendental and the mundane. Selva Almada, Argentinian writer, novelist, noted on her first reading Liliana's Invisible Summer, my sister's main organizational device aligned itself quite well with the way in which Facebook or Twitter both produce and storage personal information. Her notes, postcards, little somethings manifested her appreciation for the minutiae of life, its timely palpitation, what Georges Perec called the infraordinary. While major social transformations of her time did not escape her attention, mentioning in passing, for example, the fall of the Berlin Wall, she invariably geared toward the materials, anecdotes, and relationship of everyday life, where hierarchies were at best porous, often at odds with the establishment. Liliana was undoubtedly a good archivist of herself, but also, and perhaps irremediably, a good archivist of her world. For as Didi Hooverman has argued, archives define interior spaces and map exterior ones as well. In addition, Liliana not only committed a series of papers to a storage place, she intently produced them for public view as she transcribed much of this material herself. Indeed, she wrote and often copied the letters she sent, saving the ones she received in impeccable shape. As many others facing this kind of documentation, upon first opening the boxes containing her belongings, I had the eerie sensation that Liliana preserved these papers expressly for me, making sure that I could read them and in turn write with them. I immediately understood that Liliana was urging me to write not about her, but with her, by her side, guided by her quirky voice and her snarky ways, guided by what she perceived and understood, and by what the world in which she lived obscured and muddled. Affective archives are as relevant for what they manage to transpire and directly show as for what they share, but in the form of an enigma. 2021. I strove to write the story of Liliana for entire years, failing spectacularly each time. It was not until 2020 when I came face to face with the documents she had forged and collected herself over the years that I was finally able to articulate her story. I wrote Liliana's Invisible Summer relentlessly, nonstop, in successive bouts of anger and hope during the first pandemic. Suddenly aware of my own mortality, I was afraid that if I died, and at 56, it was very likely that I died, Liliana's life was going to be wiped off from the surface of the earth, erased from our collective memory forever and for good. I was afraid. No, I was infuriated. I was beside myself, thinking that the work of his aggressor, which began with pledges of eternal love and continued with fits of jealousy, which began with verbal abuse and developed into pushing and shoving, which eventually deprived her from air, suffocating her with a pillow, was going to be irreversibly finalized. In a bid for complete control, Perpetrators seek to obliterate their victims, subsuming them totally to their whims. What else could Angel Gonzalez Ramos hope but the total erasure of Liliana as she was, brilliant and sarcastic, compassionate and free? What else could satisfy him the most but knowing that the Liliana we loved and grieved was to be completely silent at last? Writing is at times a kind of air. Liliana's papers crowded my desk, the dining table, the kitchen island. And as I read them and then transcribed them, unwittingly following her own practices as a transcriptionist, I found myself gluing yellow stickies on various walls, trying to give some all-encompassing order, whether chronological, thematical, even alphabetical, to the many notes she so amorously had written and so consciously, systematically, even painstakingly collected over the years. They contained and were structured by her language, the words and diction of a teenager, as she became, and resolutely so, her own woman. The notes brought to bear to her point of view, a perspective that both made manifest and defied the patriarchal operations that shaped everyday life in late 20th century Mexico and beyond. I have argued with Rachel Snyder and her with no visible bruises in mind that what we didn't know about domestic violence, about intimate partner terrorism, killed Liliana on July 16, 1990. If we all had known, included Liliana herself, we surely would have taken measures to protect her and denounce her torturer. But we didn't, and she didn't. Or did she? In her affective archive, thus lies this gap, where she didn't know and yet sensed, where she lacked a specific language for and yet organically recognized, what haunted her and she struggled against, the shapelessness that characterized violence at its very core. That's the gaping nature of the archive. Words and what they uncover are as relevant for the truth, for the story, as the whole lacunae and gaps words outlined but cannot advance. In The Great Cat Massacre and Other Stories, noted French historian Robert Darnton convincingly argued that readers of archival materials should move away from legible documents, the papers that make sense and thus confirm a certain, at times presentist, understanding of the world, opting instead for papers whose very opacity, both in form and content, escaped prescribed notions of such a world, offering thus a unique entry into a distinctive realm of life. Walter Benjamin has famously written about montage as a political and cultural strategy to read and activate the fossils, which in the form of ruins or remains contain the very possibilities of future for now concealed. The montage helps unleash the now time, a qualitative break with history, the here and now of discontinuous temporality, what Didi Huberman refers to as anachronism, through which readers are able to connect or reconnect past and present, future and past, opening up the doors of the afterlife and for the afterlife. I read Liliana's papers in opacity and through opacity, honoring the limits of an enigma that is shared as such as an enigma, striving to achieve the here and now of our sisterhood. Julio Cortázar once reminded young writers that the narrator of the stories should not leave the characters outside of the narrative. That is to say, the narrators should refrain from explaining what the characters don't or can't on their own. Creative writing workshops in the United States phrase the same advice in the bifurcation between showing versus telling. A writing intent on sharing an experience rather than an anecdote ought to be able to activate, articulating them, the systems of perceptions of both writers and readers. That's why knowledge of both body and territory is so essential in this task. Less as mere pieces of information and more as operations that might bring up shared memories and practices, our own now time. That's why I restrained myself from editorializing Liliana's words, filling the gaps she intended as such or couldn't even conceive of. I offered my own experience both in the past and the present as a framing device, a way of placing the gap in an affective context made often of pure silences. As she becomes vulnerable in the scenario of the present, I become vulnerable with her, agreeing with Gabriela Wiener when she said that Liliana was now our sister, the sister of many. Writing will not bring her back alive, but writing, her own and my own, both inextricably intertwined, has made possible for Liliana to find her true contemporaries, and even more, her contemporariness, rebellious, independent, polyamorous, imaginative. Liliana is among her peers now. Her past now a shared and unfinished present. We get her jokes and understand her desire. We wink at once and holding hands, dash away toward the ocean. It's a fine, dry day on the coast, and I am ready now to plunge in. It is 2022, by the way. Thank you. Stop sharing. Yes.
Thank you so much, Cristina. It is very hard to try to respond to such a personal book. I think it's even out of place to try to intellectualize such a personal book. But I think one thing that intrigues me, or that I think makes us all reflect upon the process of reading and writing in the context that you presented to us, is how the process of affective reading, unearthing, uncovering the personal archive of Liliana in the context of impunity and void and lack of evidence in the public sphere, how that process of going back to their lived experience from such a distant time give equality and a special meaning to writing, how that process of reading and reconstructing give the flesh of your writing. And the question has to do with also, there are two processes here that I think of. The one that make you write, which is very interesting. I think that would be the first question I would have, that how this moment in 2019, this political action, this going back into society that is not related to Liliana, it's related to the here and now from Mexico in that moment, in a very different context, resurrected Liliana's very personal voice. I think this is a very special circumstance that I have read or encountered in other writers. Benjamin idea that you quoted about resurrecting time or real time from the death of historicity, precisely that. Jorge Aguilar Mora searching for the voices of the revolucionarios while also searching for his brother is also a way to come to terms with our present time. So that's one aspect that I found very meaningful and important, and maybe the one that could make us see where those our true and most genuine position when we try to address topics of justice. How these two moments, the very personal one, the one that touches us in our hearts, in our body, is so close to the public sphere, so close to the society we live in. I think this is something that I have reflected on when I read your book. The other is how or what happened after you release the book, trying to find justice, because what I sense reading the book and listening to you now and in the interviews I've read about it is not just this affective relationship with the archive, but also race, the need to bring justice someone who is still outside, and that impunity reigns, and that finally, hopefully, the book and its release and the press and public sphere would actually help us find this person that could, bring to justice and have due process, but bring to justice, and not this silent, this enigma that is the desperate situation of our time in feminicide, desaparecidos at the borders, and that is the way we are muted and we circulate like ghosts because we have this. No, that's the other point that I think when you say if language is enough or not, the idea of can we articulate writing and reading, can we reach that stage when we feel liberated and we feel that justice has been accomplished. No, that's the other one. And the last one, when we talk about your book, it's a third process because you wrote the book, and as you said, you wrote the book non-stop in a process of all of a sudden you said, now it's time, and you wrote it. But when you think about the book and you talk about the book, there is a second reflection, another level of reflection. And there you are reflecting about writing, about reading, and about the meaning of this for you, but also for society. And I would like maybe to comment a little bit about that process. That process important, and in which sense for us, how can we think of the afterlife of a book? The process is reading it, and then there is the afterlife of the book. And sometimes writers say, I don't want to talk about a book I've written. I put the book aside, and the book is there, and the book belongs to the readers and society. But I think this case might be different or not. So those are my humble reflections, my most immediate reflections. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adela, for your questions. This is really, really interesting to me. As I was saying earlier, before I started reading the actual paper, I've been working with archives now for a number of years. The first novel I published by the very end of the 20th century is Nadie me verá llorar, No One Will See Me Cry, which is also based on an archival research. The files of an insane, the General Insane Asylum La Castañeda, founded in 1910. And then I've been, letting me guide my curiosity. I've been letting archives guide me when I've been curious about topics. I've been arguing now for a number of years that the research and archival is just one aspect of this research, process, which could be much larger, of course, but research is a way of caring. This is the way in which we justify the fact that we can write about these specific topics that we choose to explore, or as writers are prone to say, that they choose us to explore them as well. So there is that, there is always that sense of presentness in my work with archives. I have seldom felt that when I do archival research, I'm looking into the past. I think it is like a double motion. I am looking and reading documents that ring true or make sense for questions that are ultimately generated in our present. So there is that double motion that to me is absolutely important. And likewise, I think there is this very personal concern about everything that I've been doing research about, and my several encounters with the state. Or as in this, because after all, many of the archives that I've been doing research in are official archives, are institutional archives, are the way in which the state teaches us to tell our stories and to storage and provide evidence of our experience, right, as citizens of the specific countries and regions. So, but what my experience in this archive, in these various archives, has taught me is that the reach of the state is quite limited. And that obviously, as I was saying later in the paper, not all documents find a restful place in an archive. Some of them I find temporarily a place in these archives, and then they're going to be pushed out, expelled from that place, so to speak, as well. So there is always this very tense relationship with what the state does and how the state does it, and with the personal interest and personal affect that moves the energy around these various explorations. So the context of the enunciation, the context of the first question, I think is very important. It's a context in which present circumstances and present questions are extremely relevant. And I often feel like touching or looking at, experiencing these documents is a way of bringing, not a way through which I am going into the past, but a way of bringing all these remnants, all these pieces of the past, to bring them into the present. And through a reading that is very often against the grain, and a reading that is looking not only for what is being said, but also for what is not there, for what doesn't make sense. I think I'm able to lift the multiple layers that compose the present, the world in which we live and make sense of ourselves right now. So in the story that I shared with you right now, I was telling you about this to me momentous meeting with this ETLN event. There is I think it was Karl Kraus who said that we write not because we understand, because we feel understood, right? And it seems to me that it was at that point that it became clear that the story that I had to tell, that I knew that I had to tell, I was in front of the audience. I was in front of the people who could embrace that story, bring it into light in ways that were more aligned with what I thought of the story and with what my sister might have thought also about the story. So it is not that I didn't know what had happened exactly, although the research allowed me to uncover lots and lots of information, not details of the events, but it was more the case about this very important feeling that I have found I was at the right time and in the right place, that this story could be told from the perspective of my sister in dignified ways, that I didn't have to betray myself, that I didn't have to betray her, especially in order to be able to tell the story. And so the moment encountering the documents, opening that box with the documents, it brought another very important element to this sense of presentness. I opened these boxes that had been closed for 30 years, meaning literally that no one had touched these materials for all these many years. So the last person who had touched those materials was my sister. And all these years after that, I was right there making a material contact with her. That's how I felt it. So it was something of her hand had remained in those pieces of papers, and something of my own touch was entering in contact with her. I wanted that presentness, that sense of immediacy, that sense of she is here in the book. I wanted her life in a way that was not explanatory, in a way that was not overriding her own saying. That's what I mean when I say that I didn't want to editorialize her. I didn't want to correct her. I didn't want to say what she really mean was. I just wanted to read her and to be able to place that information in a structure, able to capture the urgency of our present. And of course, we all know that violence against women and violence against migrants, both of them are two of the major tragedies of our lives. Let's remember that today, when this aggression against, oh my gosh, Ukraine has just taken place, unleashing what could be a major conflict in the globe. So, so that was a point. I wanted that story. I wanted that presentness. I wanted that material presence, and I had this richness, these many systematically recorded documents. It was just a mine. And so, as I said, I wrote the book, and then I published the book. And I'm getting into the territory of your second question now. What happens after that? What happened about after the releasing of the book? When I started to give interviews related to the book, we at the press decided to create an email account, and that I was going to invite people, just if they had known the predator, if they had any contact with Angel Gonzalez Ramos. I just was asking all of them to send a note, to send a tip. If they knew something, I wanted to know. Interestingly enough, the response to this invitation was extremely generous. It was very emphatic. It was actually very important. It made me think a lot about what justice means, about not only the penal aspect of justice, but a more all-encompassing understanding of justice as a way of restituting someone's memory and a way of caring also for the truth. I owe this understanding of justice to several conversations I've held with Sayuri Herrera, who is now in charge of the Fiscalía de Feminicidios in Mexico City. I've been in touch with her. I've been posing questions to her. She has tons of experience. As many of you know, she is the one, she's the lawyer who worked so closely with the mother of Lesbi Berlin, and brought her murderer to justice. So I would say that this idea of restitution, this idea of bringing back a memory that reflected, that came embedded in Liliana's own words and reflected her own way of looking at the world was not only important to me personally, but I think is an aspect of this more larger sense of justice that I'm trying to comprehend, to get close to. So it is very important to me still to bring Ángel González Ramos to justice. I haven't forgotten that. That's something that is prescient and is incredibly important. But at the same time, I think that the work that readers around, in Mexico and beyond, the work that they've done in terms of activating this idea of sisterhood is incredibly important too in relation to your questions about the afterlife of femicide and our search for justice. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I wanted to end this conversation with quoting Gabriela Winner's own words. Gabriela is a wonderful Peruvian nonfiction writer who has lived in Barcelona, in Madrid for a long time. And when she helped me to launch this book in Madrid, she very naturally spoke of Liliana as her own sister. And she was inviting other men and women to become Liliana's sisters or brothers too. And I was thinking, it's such an important, it's a very, it's a very enduring action, but at the same time, it's absolutely political, both of them. It's very personal, but at the same time, we're doing something that affects our relationship to memory, our relationship to power, and our relationship to a network of solidarities and care that we very much need if we want to fight against patriarchy. And I'm convinced that that's the fight. So if one of the greatest tragedies of our world is precisely this relentless systematic killing of women, I think our one of the major struggles has to interrogate directly and intently the very foundations of patriarchy. So I hope that the effective power, the activation that comes with Liliana's own documents, that the message that she made sure that I read and that I passed along, I would like to think that this is just one of the many activities, a contribution, so to speak, to a larger struggle against these forces that limit us in such a tragic ways.
Thank you so much, Cristina. I think particularly the affective aspect that you convey in the book, and that you let Liliana breathe through the pages with its gaps and everything, that brings that very strong feeling of solidarity and sisterhood. And I think it's a beautiful message, particularly today, in the context we are living today in the world. There is a question in the chat from Liliana Ramírez, and she says, and I agree, yo creo que la presencia de Liliana hoy a través de la palabra de Cristina nos permite también a muchas otras hacer como un duelo colectivo, ¿no? Is what you were just saying, y lo agradezco. I think that is a beautiful comment. Cesar Salgado, who is a colleague of us, he says, gorgeous, searching, and nuanced presentation. Susana Sharp says, just deeply moving and beautiful written. And Cristina Ochoa, Cristina, your writing is healing our collective memory. Gracias.
If you allow me, what I would like to add to that, un poquito en español para balancear las cosas. Esta conexión que va del archivo a la acción, yo creo que es bien importante. Que a veces pensamos que los archivos son cosas que están ahí, ¿no? En un lugar haciéndose viejos, y en efecto a veces lo son, ¿no? Pero una vez que son leídos, ¿no? Una vez que son traídos al presente, yo creo que tienen esta fuerza que viene del pasado, pero de un pasado que no está ido, de un pasado que sigue aquí con nosotros, ¿no? Entonces, esta relación me interesa mucho. Archivo, escritura y acción. Creo que las tres cosas van unidas. Y nada más quiero mencionar una cosa más sobre la materialidad de este aspecto. Ustedes en las fotos que mostré durante la presentación pudieron ver la letra de Liliana y pudieron ver la tinta en la que está escrita muchos de los recados de Liliana. En la editorial intentamos hacer pues una copia lo más fiel posible, una réplica lo más fiel posible al trabajo de archivo, a los documentos, a la letra de los documentos. Y esto lo conseguimos gracias al diseño de Raúl, se me olvida ahorita su nombre, pero de Raúl, que está incluido en el libro, uno de los amigos de Liliana, que se puso a diseñar con base en los documentos que compartimos, ¿no? Entonces, ya el colmo, y lo mejor habría sido que esas partes estuvieran escritas también en tinta morada, y creo que la similaridad habría sido enorme. Pero en todo caso, el asunto aquí tiene que ver con cómo este tipo de materialidades, ¿no? De corporalidades, también trabajan en favor de esa relación entre archivo y acción, ¿no? Lo que tenemos aquí son pedazos de vida, son pedazos de experiencia que estamos tocando con nuestros sentidos, con nuestro sistema de percepción y que estamos de alguna manera desatando. Y creo que ese desatar es fundamental para la acción, para el pensamiento crítico, ¿no? Para lo que hacemos como investigadores, para lo que hacemos dentro de los salones de clase y para lo que hacemos también en las calles, en nuestras comunidades.
Es como romper el silencio, ¿verdad? Romper el silencio que estaba al origen de poder expresar y después dejar ser este archivo. A mí lo que me encantó ahorita de los extractos que compartiste es también la selección de Liliana de los textos, ¿verdad? Un poema de José Pacheco, representativo. Y lo que lo que es más telling para mí es la transcripción del poema, ¿verdad? Decir, este poema me gustó y voy a transcribirlo. Y eso eso ya showing y telling, ¿verdad? Eso ya muestra a Liliana sin necesidad de ninguna mediación para explicar lo que está ahí, ¿no? Y creo yo que eso es lo que hemos logrado, como conocer un poquito creo que todas las personas son un enigma y siempre quedan en eso. Cuando nos vamos de esta vida siempre queda el enigma de la persona, no se revela del todo, y creo que estos tractos revelan algo muy íntimo de ella sin revelarla toda, ¿verdad? Como debe ser, ¿verdad? Hay otras preguntas aquí. Dice Lina, speechless and tearful. Dice Paloma, Siri Gurudev, en la audiencia dice, always opening paths for us. Cristina, gracias. Tu scholarship es tan inspiradora y necesaria. Ana López, que es una estudiante de nuestro programa, nos dice, muchísimas gracias, Cristina, por compartirnos este entramado de tu voz y la de Liliana. Ahora que hablas de la acción, ¿podrías contarnos más sobre cómo vives la relación entre el archivo, el cuerpo y la escritura? ¿O cómo encuerpas la escritura al dialogar con el archivo?
Bueno, mucho tiene que ver incluso con lo que estamos haciendo el día de hoy, ¿no? Hay una versión que queda en el libro, ¿no? El que se intercambia, se regala, está allá afuera, y esa misma versión tiene otro tipo de resonancias. Yo creo que estas conversaciones, así en público, aunque parece que estamos aquí muy íntimos con solo unas cuantas ventanitas, ¿no? O las conversaciones en clase, o las nuevas conexiones con otro tipo de lenguajes, ¿no? Por ejemplo, yo sabía muy poco, y sé todavía muy poco, del lenguaje legal alrededor de todas estas cosas. Estoy tratando de prepararme también para pensar en ese otro aspecto de la realidad, ¿no? Pero yo creo que hay, hay muchas formas de actuar, ¿no? A veces pensamos que es del archivo a la calle, pero entre el archivo y la calle hay un montón de claroscuros y de lugares donde estas conversaciones son bien importantes. Yo creo que con las mujeres que perdemos a causa de la violencia de género, pasa como con poblaciones que han sufrido violencias fundamentales, ¿no? La esclavitud o los trabajos forzados, ¿no? Que con frecuencia cuando tratamos de contar esas vidas es fácil reducirlas a esos momentos más álgidos y más terribles. En el caso de las mujeres que perdemos a causa de la violencia, la historia de la muerte parece cubrir todo lo demás. Y a mí en el libro me interesaba mucho que quedara claro que lo que hay ahí es una vida y una vida compleja, ¿no? Y una vida que no es fácil aprender. Y yo no quería hacer nada para facilitar esa aprehensión, ¿no? Yo quería también poner ahí las cosas que no entiendo, las cosas que tal vez Liliana tampoco entendía, ¿no? Y yo creo que esa es otra forma de acuerpamiento, ¿no? Esa es una forma también como decía en el texto, de compartir el enigma como enigma, el de que el afán intelectual, académico que a veces nos gana de querer explicarlo todo, ¿no? A veces no llegamos ahí y a veces es más importante, ¿no? Y más productivo señalar esa especie de hoyo, esa especie de nebulosa, ¿no? Para ver cómo es que lo recibimos, cómo es que lo compartimos nosotros, cómo es que lo traemos también a nuestra propia vida, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que hay una multiplicidad de elementos, una multiplicidad de fases, ¿no? Y de espacios concretos donde esta vida del archivo, más allá del lugar del archivo, no solo se puede dar, sino que se está dando. Y yo diría que esta conversación aquí es una fase más, ¿no?
Sí, hay quien ha dicho que en muchas de tus escritos anteriores, particularmente en algunas de las novelas, está el fantasma del tema de la desaparición, de la mujer que desaparece del texto de diversas maneras y desaparece en un sentido espectral, pero también con la elección de los narradores, ¿verdad? Quién cuenta la historia, cómo la historia se va evadiendo o va muriendo en el mismo texto y que hay este sentido de espectralidad. En el libro de El Invencible Verano de Liliana, yo creo que, mi opinión como lectora, has logrado lo contrario, porque creo yo que el cuerpo y la vitalidad de Liliana aflora de una manera muy poderosa. Creo que nos da mucha esperanza. Eh, Creo que si hay en algunas novelas un poco el legado, ¿verdad?, de la escritura de vanguardia o de la escritura moderna, a donde nos hemos adelgazado porque la realidad es tan dura o X razones, aquí creo yo que hay una apuesta por la vida desde el archivo afectivo de Liliana. Y creo yo que eso es lo que es más inspirador de este libro, Cristina. Creo yo que ahí es a donde yo quedo muy agradecida como lectora.
Sabes, te agradezco muchísimo que hagas ese comentario sobre la esperanza porque el libro, por supuesto, es un libro apesadumbrado, es un libro muy enrabiado. Por supuesto, está lidiando con los aspectos más extremos, ¿no?, de nuestra vida cotidiana. Lo repito ya por tercera vez, ¿no? Una de las tragedias de las que no nos podemos escapar en el mundo contemporáneo, que estamos continuamente enfrentando una y otra vez, ¿no? Pero para mí era muy importante que este aspecto vital y vitalista, que viene, creo yo, directamente de la materialidad de las fuentes, ¿no? Y creo que hay ahí este interés de que lo que se encuentra en el archivo no solo es contenido, ¿no?, sino es forma también, ¿no? Entonces, tratar de escuchar a Liliana, de leer con cuidado a Liliana, ha sido una manera también de descubrir, de tratar de avisorar sus propias estructuras y su propia forma. yo creo que hay ahí en eso, en ese interés o énfasis sobre esa materialidad también, una afirmación por lo que podemos hacer aquí y ahora y juntos. Es decir, en la medida en que los libros tienen mensaje, y yo tiendo a ser muy escéptica al respecto, ¿no? Los libros tienen muchas cosas, incluso a veces hasta mensajes, ¿no? Pero yo creo que esto que he ido recibiendo, ¿no? Después de la publicación, esta respuesta, es decir, vamos juntas, somos parte de esto. Creo que es lo que oigo yo al menos cuando dicen Liliana es mi hermana o también es parte de mi familia, o siento que la conozco, ¿no? Yo creo que esa es una fuerza que viene directamente de la materia que los archivos hacen posible. Y que si uno tiene paciencia, tiene tolerancia por lo incierto, y en lugar de controlar, que se puede dejar llevar, ¿no? Por todos estos materiales, creo que esa es una riqueza enorme, no solo en nuestro proceso de producir conocimiento, sino de producir acción, ¿no? De producir presente. Entonces sí, para mí eso es una, no sé, una cosa en la que pienso mucho. Se lo leí hace ya varios años a Josefina Ludmer cuando hablaba de las literaturas postautónomas. Y siempre estoy así como, pero ¿qué exactamente quería decir? ¿No? Y creo que tratando de contestarme esa pregunta han venido estos últimos libros, especialmente El Invisible Verano de Liliana y Solchit.
Muchas gracias, Cristina. Te abrazamos, aunque sea virtualmente. Te queremos. Síguenos dándonos estos libros, Cristina. Gracias a todos en este foro por estar con nosotros y seguimos.
Gracias a ti, gracias a todos. Qué amable.
Gracias.